Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this
Welcome.
webinar on intellectual property and creative industries. This is the sixth webinar in the series of webinars being conducted by the Harvard University South Asia Institute as part of the Tata Trust project. This webinar would be presented by Mr. Gurigbal Singh Jaya from the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. Mr. Gurigbal Singh Jaya is serving as the Director to the Executive Director, WIPO Academy of the World Intellectual Property Organization. From 1978 onwards to November 1993, as a member of the Indian Administrative Service, Mr. Jaya served in the district, state and central governments and shouldered a wide spectrum of regulatory, development, magisterial and judicial responsibilities. From 1993, Mr. Jaya was with the World Intellectual Property Organization, where he served in multiple positions and has, over the years, made presentations in some 55 countries on different aspects of intellectual property asset management in a very diverse set of events, and has made very substantial contributions to numerous WIPO publications. Mr. Jaya would be sharing his insights on intellectual property from the vast experience he has had. All the participants will be on listen-only mode and can start sending in their questions after the first 30 minutes of the webinar. Kindly use the questions option in the webinar control panel on your screen to send in your questions. Now over to Mr. Gurigbal Singh Jaya.
Thank you, Mukundan. It's indeed a pleasure to be interacting through this medium with participants from the creative industry sector from all over India as part of the HBS and Tata Trust funded activity. As concerns intellectual property and its link with creative industries, let me start by first giving you a bit of background on intellectual property, for at least those who may not be fully familiar with the term intellectual property. Intellectual refers to the human intellect, and property refers to property-like rights created over the output of the human intellect, and depending on the nature of that output, if it meets the criteria of one or another type of intellectual property right, then it is protectable by that type of intellectual property right. Traditionally, when we talk of intellectual property, what comes to mind are the four major rights, which are copyright, industrial design, trademarks, and patents. However, there are a large number of other rights. For example, we have confidential information of commercial value, which are known as trade secrets in the jargon of intellectual property. We have geographical indications, which are similar to trademarks. We have integrated circuits for topographies and layouts of for protection of computer chips. Then we have protection of new varieties of plants through plant variety protection legislation to protect the rights of breeders. Similarly, we have non-original death rights and related rights such as rights to personality, etc., which are often relevant, and also rights pertaining to domain names, for example. Now, when we talk of the creative industries sector or the creative sector, this is a definitional issue as to where to draw the line between the so-called cultural industries and the creative industries, and within creative industries, where to draw the line when it comes to creative industries which are individual driven or driven in traditional settings versus creative industries which are modern, big business, digitally driven sector, or sometimes between these two in the form of small enterprises or micro enterprises, but in the commercial or digital environment. Now, talking of the creative industries, we have to examine them whether we are looking at them as side activities or hobbies versus full-time professional activities conducted in the corporate or enterprise framework. The basic questions of business strategy become critically important when we are talking of organized industrial or commercial or business activity. Much of cultural and creative works may not happen in that space, may happen in the civil society or grants related space where they are seen to be more related to social and cultural activities and indirectly contributing to tourism and related activities, where the much of the money making or the profit generation aspects relate to other aspects of the package delivered by the sector. Now, at the end of the day, for any business, whether a creative business or any other business for that matter, if it has to succeed in the marketplace, then in the today's highly competitive business environment, it has to offer something which the competitors are not offering. And that something is not just different. It is different, of course, but more than that, in some respect, it is better. And when we say better, this can have all kinds of value attached to it. So better in terms of same quality at a lower price, or same quality, same price, but delivered much faster, which means you are able to do it, the lead time being practically nil, delivered as it were instantaneously, or it has any of the other dimensions whereby the user or buyer of a cultural or creative product is somehow enjoying it more, or his needs or wants are satisfied in a better way than the competing products or services offered by other creative industry competitors in that space. The size of the sector itself is determined by what you include in it. So traditionally, we would have talked of the crafts and visual arts sector. Add to that the publishing sector, the videos, the films, and if you add further the software-based industries, then the larger sector becomes much bigger. Much of this sector is related to what is known as content creation. And there is an element of creativity in this content creation. So when the focus is on creativity, the focus shifts to copyright. When the focus is on innovation or inventive activity, then the focus shifts to patents. Generally speaking, when we talk of the creative industries side, barring software or computer generated products, the focus largely remains on copyright. Secondarily, it shifts to industrial designs. But irrespective of the sector, the ability to differentiate yourself from your competitors is often communicated only through your branding. And branding relates first and foremost to trademarks. It can also relate to geographical indications. Much of the marketing or advertising material linked to branding relates to works protected by the law of copyright. Now, let me try and give you very simple practical definitions, or should I say, I begin by illustrations. So trademarks are something that most of us are familiar with. Every day when we buy things, we don't buy a pen, we often buy a pen of a particular brand. When we buy a soft drink, we don't buy a soft drink, we buy a Coke or a Pepsi or a Thumbs Up or a other brand of soft drink that we want. So similarly, even when we are wanting to have a smoke, you don't ask for a cigarette, you ask for a particular brand. Now in the modern space, whether you are listening to music or reading a newspaper, there is a huge branding effort behind it. If it is a fashion product, a clothing product, similarly, there is a huge branding effort behind it. The branding effort, central to that branding effort, is the ability to consistently deliver on the core product or service that is linked to the brand. What goes into creating that core product is anything and everything that is done to enhance the productivity or competitiveness of the product vis-a-vis its competitors. So it can include a very large number of minor differences at a large number of places, in not just the core product that is being offered, but in its financing, in its marketing, in its various stages of value addition, whether within a single enterprise or across a whole value chain. And when we talk of value chains in the creative industries sector, then we often have to not just look at the original creator, but also the entire pipeline through which the product is processed and communicated and delivered to the final audience. And this could be a chain which exists in a small geography, or maybe countrywide, or may even, because of the digital nature of many of these products today, international in its context. Well, value chains can be international even for physical products. They could be automobiles, they could be agricultural products, they could be textile products. So there's a range of products which have an international dimension, but when it comes to digital products, even if creation is not international, the consumption of those products can be international. So if we look at Indian film industry and its products, clearly the market of those products is not just extending to the Indian diaspora internationally, but also to many other jurisdictions beyond what could be considered the Indian diaspora, when they are dubbed and made available in many other languages. Now, some intellectual property rights are considered weak rights, others are considered strong rights. In the strongest right is the so-called patent right, which is for an invention. An invention is a technical solution to a problem. That solution has to be sufficiently new and has to be non-obvious to people in that field. And of course, it should be capable of industrial or commercial use. When these three requirements are met, then an application is filed at the National IP Office. And if the office registers or grants the patent, then you have a right subsequent to that grant, and that right, if granted, will last 20 years from the date of filing of the application. So the number of years that it takes, and sometimes it takes 3 to 5 years to get such a right granted, are the period in which you have very little or practically negligible protection, and the effective protection is for the subsequent period of some 15 to 18 years only. When it comes to industrial designs or simply designs, they pertain to the visual appeal of a product. It may be in 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions. So when we look at a mobile phone or a car or some other such product where the appearance of the product is one of the reasons we are attracted to the product, and not just attracted, is in some way contributing to the decision to buy that product, then that aspect becomes important. On a computer screen, the graphic user interface in many countries is also protected by an industrial design. So for websites, then industrial design becomes important, and websites are ubiquitous. They don't only contain copyrighted content, but they also have the content protected by industrial design. But the primary content on a website is protected by copyright. Copyright, before I go to copyright, industrial design is a time-limited right, but the time limit is rather short, comparable to that of a patent. Depending on the country, it can be as short as 10 years, maximum 20 years. Patents is 20 years across the board because of international treaties in that regard, to which most countries are members. The copyright lasts for the lifetime of the creator or author, plus, depending on the national law, at least 50 years, but it can be 70 years, 90 years, or even longer. So you can see it lasts for a long time. Trademark rights pertain to either a word or a symbol or a device which distinguishes the wares, goods or services of one producer from those of its competitors. Trademark rights are granted at a time for 10 years and can last in perpetuity provided they continue to function as a trademark in the marketplace. In a country like India, trademarks are protected even without registration. However, the scope of protection is rather narrow. It is limited to the area in which the trademark is known. If registered, the rights are available all over the country, even if the product is not known all over the country. If it is registered, then you don't have to prove that you own the trademark or that it is a trademark, whereas if it is unregistered, then you first have to prove that you are indeed the owner of the unregistered mark, and two, that it functions as a mark in the marketplace. So clearly, even in India, where rights are available without registration to a trademark, there is a great advantage of registering a trademark. A PowerPoint that I have distributed on collective branding has basics of what is a trademark. It also tells you that in addition to what may be called an individual trademark, there are also two other categories of trademarks. One are called collective marks and the other are called certification marks. Collective marks are owned by a collective, an association. It need not be a formally constituted association, and all members of that association then are permitted to use a collective mark. It is registered as such as a collective mark at the trademark office, the Indian Trademark Registry. The certification marks similarly are collective in the sense that the requirements of certification have to be met, and once they are met, then anyone who meets those is allowed to use that mark, and that means any number of individuals or entities can then use the certification mark. And this certification mark could be not just in addition to an individual trademark, but this could also be in addition to a collective mark. So it is possible that a particular product may be covered by one trademark, or maybe sometimes more than one trademark, and sometimes not just one or more trademarks, but also one or more collective marks, and sometimes in addition one or more certification marks. And to complicate life further, it is possible that something which is originally protected as a collective or certification mark is subsequently also protected as a geographical indication. One of the reasons geographical names originally could not be protected was that anyone in a particular geography should be able to describe the source of origin of the goods relating to a particular geography. But when the geographical context itself gives additional value to a product, then it becomes important to permit only those who are in the geography to use that geographical name as something which is adding value. And in its simplest context, then it becomes a collective mark referring to a geographical name. But if we have a defined set of parameters, then we have the option of either having a certification mark registration system or a geographical indication system. In very crude terms, it may be said that not all countries, unlike India, have the option of all these four. That is a simple trademark, a collective mark, a certification mark, and a geographical indication. So for example, if basmati rice or Darjeeling tea has to be registered, then it can be registered only as a collective mark and not as a certification mark in Japan, but in the US, United States of America, it can be registered only as a certification mark, whereas in India, it is registered both as a certification mark and a geographical indication. The concept of registered user is equivalent to that of a licensee of an ordinary trademarks. So in a geographical indication, everyone who wishes to use the geographical indication will then have to be a registered user of the geographical indication. So it could well be that you have, let us say, 200 plus geographical indications in India, but quite a few of them till date have no registered users under them, and as such, they are not operational. And if they are not operational, then they are not providing the potential benefit that comes from linking to certification of the product originating from a particular geography. Historically, geographical indications were linked to agro-food products, mostly in Europe, and they have a long history. But their subsequent history, particularly in the 20th century, is linked to the common system of subsidies provided by the European Commission. So their further growth in Europe has been linked to this common system of subsidizing agri-food products. And one of the primary reasons for this subsidization is that the governments in these countries do not want rural households to abandon lands and move to the cities. They want rural areas to be maintained both from an ecosystems perspective and also from a tourism perspective. And they have the means to support such enterprises, and therefore it is part of that effort to support such enterprises that they are, through the Uruguay round TRIPS negotiations, which resulted in the TRIPS agreement, they have been successful in exporting their model of geographical indications to many countries, including India. In my view, a system such as geographical indications is too rigid a system, and also it involves governmental agencies in a big way. From an enterprise perspective, whether creative enterprises or otherwise, it is much better to have a system where the creator or the producer retains as much control as possible in using one or another tool of the intellectual property system. The more you get involved in bureaucracy becoming responsible for part of your branding effort, the greater the challenges. In any case, even when we talk of a geographical indication or a certification mark, a prerequisite that must be met is the ability to bring people together to have a common understanding and a common definition and a system to verify that definition, which specifies the characteristics that a product must fulfill before it can use a particular certification mark or geographical indication. So testing becomes a significant part of that process. One of the biggest problems with geographical indications, even in the European context, despite the subsidies, has been that if you specify that a particular wine should be made from grapes of a particular variety only, or 90% of the grapes used for that wine should be of a particular variety only, and by doing so, if you find that you are unable to compete with other wines which may or may not be made from the same grapes but which have different geographical indications, and some of the wines may not even have any geographical indications, then perforce the geographical indication specification has to be adjusted to reduce the quantity of the grapes required, which were originally central to the definition, from 90% to 80% or less. And that means that to a certain extent, while you are retaining the original name of the geographical indication, but what you are getting under it is changing from the past years to the times they obtain now. So in a certain sense, while you may be consistent in what you produce at the present time, but this consistency is not the same consistency as it was a few years earlier when the standards or specifications were different. Another problem that can arise with geographical indications is that it is assumed that the agroclimatic conditions that pertain to a particular place cannot exist elsewhere outside that geography. In today's day and age, it is often possible to recreate those exact agroclimatic conditions, certainly in greenhouses, but even otherwise, different parts of the globe can have similar climates, and at the same place, the climate can change a lot from year to year. So even when you have a system of geographical indications, the vintage of a wine often determines the price that you will get for that wine, and not just the geographical indication, because the year in which the crop was harvested, the grapes were harvested, can have a significant role to play. And if demand for a particular geographical indication goes up, since the product cannot be produced outside that geography, then automatically it is not possible to increase production, which might have been possible if you could have taken recourse to producing the product elsewhere. In Israel, it happened that they have a particular variety of oranges called Jaffa oranges, which grow in the region called Jaffa in Israel, which are indeed very, very tasty, and therefore command a premium price on the market, not just in Israel, but in Europe and elsewhere. They found that the same oranges could not just be grown, but produce the same quality in South Africa, and they agreed to license the geographical indication to another geography, far removed from Israel, from Jaffa. And then you ended up in a peculiar problem that a geographical indication by definition cannot be licensed to anyone outside the geography to which the geographical indication pertains. And the country had a law pertaining to Jaffa oranges as the sole protection under that law, and they ran into a political problem as to how to then annul a law. And they found a peculiar solution to a problem which indeed had no solution, and they renewed the geographical indication of Jaffa oranges even though the license was given. So you can see commercial interests overrode the legal framework that existed. When it comes to intellectual property, what the system of intellectual property does is it converts knowledge, because whether we are talking of copyright or industrial designs or patents, it is the ideas or their expression or their use in a particular way which is being protected. And unlike a physical object, knowledge can exist simultaneously at a large number of places, which means it cannot be controlled by its creator unless it is given some kind of a property like right. And therefore, when intellectual output is given a property like right through specific laws for this purpose, then we get intellectual property rights. So these are not natural rights as you could have over a natural object, a physical object, which one could say, for example, that someone who possesses a physical object can be considered to be its owner, which may not always be the case, but from a very practical point of view, that is a good assumption to make. When it comes to intellectual assets, possession is not ownership. And this is a complicating feature, because if I have some content, whether it's written words or a painting or a photograph, in the digital era you can have any number of copies made out of it simply by disseminating it, for example, in the online environment. Or even in the physical world, reproducing any number of copies through photocopying is very, very easy nowadays. So making multiple copies has become very simple, fast, and low cost compared with the original effort of creating an original work. And that is why if innovation and creativity have to be encouraged, then you need a system. That system may be a purely technical system or a purely legal system or a combination of these two. You need some way to incentivize and reward the creators. And in creative industries, that reward is just as important as in any other area. I would like to emphasize the importance of trade secrets for any business, including a creative industries business. Secrecy is at the heart of competitiveness of a business. But within the context of a business, secrets have to be shared in confidence. So understanding what is a trade secret becomes especially important when a large number of small secrets add up to a big difference when it comes to the competitiveness of any business, including a creative enterprise. The importance of a trade secret arises from the fact that the information is secret. So for example, even a list of customers or suppliers of a product can be a trade secret, even when the list can be compiled by a competitor, for example, from a telephone book or an industry source book. The reason why such a list can be valuable is that I, as a business, if I choose a particular set of suppliers, then clearly, even without knowing what is it that makes these suppliers better, my competitors, if they find out who my suppliers are, probably get a lot of valuable information, as they can then source the same inputs from the same suppliers. They will still not get the detailed terms and conditions that I as a business have with these suppliers. So any such related information then also becomes a trade secret. The pricing information becomes a trade secret. The details of a marketing strategy become a trade secret. Anything in the production process which enables me to do things cheaper, faster, or better, which cannot be gleaned from the final product, then become important trade secrets. So even if I make minor changes at 100 places, and each of those adds up to a significant whole, I become empowered by those trade secrets. So for example, in the creative industry space, if we look at Zara as a fashion house, Zara's ability to find what is the trend on the market and then translate that trend into its own product line in a short span of time, which could be as short as 10 days to 2 weeks. A very large number of factors go into its ability to produce and put on the shelves a trend that was noticed barely 2 weeks earlier, whereas its competitors cannot do the same. Even if they notice the same trend at the same time as Zara did, it takes them at least 6 weeks, and by then Zara has put out a limited edition which has been on the market, so to speak. It has captured the market for those 4 weeks, and at the end of those 4 weeks Zara is ready for its next supply of limited edition stuff, which which is expected to do well on the market. So in this case, the strength of the Zara brand comes from its ability to have a software system, a transportation system, and everything else that links to it, where everyone else now understands what gives Zara the strength. Competitors cannot create a rival brand. They can, of course, create counterfeit products and label them as Zara, and that is where enforcing your rights in the trademark becomes critically important. Sometimes in some jurisdictions, if it is not considered a well-known trademark, then you may not be able to defend your trademark rights, but you may be able to defend your copyright in the advertising and marketing material that has been created and used. When, as a business, even if you are not a creative enterprise, but you are using a website, it is critically important for you to know what is it that you own and what you don't own. So normally the one who creates owns the intellectual property over it. So for example, the copyright belongs to the author or creator, unless the author or the creator is an employee. And when the author or creator is an employee, then depending on the national law, in some countries the author or creator initially is always the actual person who creates, but may have to transfer or assign the copyright by contract to the employer. In some countries this may not be possible. In other countries, when we talk of copyright, we don't talk of just the economic rights, we also talk of what are known as moral rights. So moral rights are rights pertaining to being identified as the creator of the copyrighted work. So this is called the right of paternity. Similarly, there is another right, the right to integrity of a work. So if I create a beautiful painting or sculpture, then no one else can make modifications or disfigure the sculpture or painting. So whether that modification is seen to be positive or negative, this is against the integrity of the author's creation, creator's creation, and the author or creator can prohibit or prevent or claim damages for any such action taken by anyone without authorization. One of the primary reasons you want to create a property-like right over your creations is that while we do use the term sell, actually you are not selling, you are licensing your products. So for example, when you buy a book, you buy the physical entity of a book or a music CD or a video, but you do not own the copyright in the book or the music CD or the video. That belongs to the either the creator or the company which commissioned the creator. Now, you would see that sometimes these issues can become very complex. So if we start looking at copyright and we start looking at the different types of rights in the bundle of copyright, then of course the first simple right is the right to make copies. So the owner of the copyright alone has the right to make copies. But then there could be other rights relevant for a type of work. It could be the right to translate it into other languages. It may be the right to convert something which is text into sound, which means music may be composed and sung. Something which is in physical form can be digitized. Something which is capable of being put on a website and therefore made available to the public. Copyright can also attach to something which otherwise has gone out of copyright. So if I have, let us say, 10 works by an author, or by, let's say, 10 different authors, and the author died 100 years ago. So today, practically in all countries, such a work of such authors is in the public domain. But if I compile these works and I put in a lot of effort in deciding what permutation and combination of these works will I compile in a particular way, then I have copyright in the compilation, even though each of the components in the compilation are not protected by copyright. And this can become challenging in the digital environment, where if I have the option as a user of such a product to view or download only a portion of the compiled work, then I may be faced with a problem if any of the compiled works is protected by copyright. And that is where the problem can become complex, when the 10 elements in a compiled work are created by a freelance contributor who is not an employee, whereas the publisher then publishes this in an online environment and is offering it to its subscribers, and there can be therefore disputes over this. There are 2-3 links that I shared this morning, which also I would like to share with you, where complex issues of copyright about selfies have recently been debated, one pertaining to a monkey taking pictures and one of the pictures becoming well known and being put on Wikimedia, and the author having a legal dispute with Wikimedia on copyright. The other about selfies, where well-known personalities, photographs taken by them or by their friends with their cameras have become an issue. So not just in the creative industries context, but even in your day-to-day context, you can end up in situations where those who are in the creative space either end up creating situations where they are having to defend their actions. So in educational institutions, students can use equipment to download copyrighted material from the web, and you can have contributory liability of the institution which provides the equipment for infringement of someone else's copyright and does not have policies in place to prevent it. It can happen in not just an educational institution, it can happen in a business itself. Or a business puts up lots of content on its website, not realizing that what they are taking from the web is not free of copyright. It may be free in terms of not having to pay for it, but that doesn't give you the right to use it for a commercial purpose. So when you put content on your own website as a business, then you cannot take content elsewhere on the web and use it, whether text or photographs or videos, without taking permission. And taking permission means taking a license, in the jargon of intellectual property. So much of the money that is made by the so-called creative industries sector is made by licensing of their intellectual property, and more often than not it is by licensing of their copyright. And that is why copyright becomes central to many copyright or creative industries or cultural industries when it comes to their exploitation in the marketplace. Having said that, I also said that copyright is, compared to patents, a weak right. What makes copyright weak? When it comes to patents, an independent creation is also deemed to be theft under copyright, under patent law. Under copyright law, an independent creation, even if identical, is not deemed to be theft of copyright, which means actual copying, or at least the possibility of copying, needs to be proved, which means the creator of the copyrighted works should be first able to prove that the creator was indeed earlier in time than the copier. And secondly, that the copier had an opportunity or possibility of copying. If the two things, one of the two things cannot be proven, then you have great difficulty in exerting your copyright. But once you are able to exert your copyright, then depending on the law of the country, you may have both civil and criminal remedies. So if it is piracy, then increasingly the chances are that you may also be liable for criminal action. Inadvertent infringement often may only result in civil action, where you may end up losing a lot of money and effort and time in doing certain things which could have easily been avoided if you knew what the intellectual property system is all about. To say that a creative industry business can succeed without copyright or intellectual property in today's complex world is not true. You have to be aware of the intellectual property system. Sometimes all you need to understand is that this system needs to be navigated. You need the freedom to operate, and therefore you need to choose wisely without infringing the rights of others. Or if you are attacked, then you must know when, in what circumstances, what you are doing is limited or accepted from the framework of each of these rights. Only then you will be able to do those actions. But generally speaking, when you are in the commercial space, these limitations or exceptions to different types of IP rights don't come to your aid. The fair dealing or fair use exceptions of copyright are generally speaking not available to someone who is in a business enterprise. I think I am now ready for questions, if any.
The first question is by Ajit.
Thank you so much. You put a lot of meat on the table, a lot of information. I'm going to have to go back and careful study it all. I used to import crafts. I know the laws exist, but how do you enforce them in India? I never found much grounds for it. I was working in UP with rugs and in Jodhpur and all with wood. I never found anybody able to stop plagiarization. Any ideas on how to enforce legally?
The challenge is that when it comes to designs of rugs and other things, the slightest of change often is considered to be original or novel from the purpose for the point of design law. So these the law of design, like copyright law, is again a weak law unless the design has been copied and is deemed to be identical or fairly identical. Taking a case to court becomes difficult even if the courts were efficient. The second problem that you face in a country like India is that there is a huge backlog of court cases, and when you do not have specialized case courts for intellectual property, and when the presiding officers of these courts do not have the background of intellectual property, since most of them, when they went to law school, were not taught intellectual property subjects. So you have a greater challenge. Their lawyers may not know the law. The presiding officer of the court doesn't know the law. The business is something that has been beefed up over the last couple of decades, but between what the level that we need and the level that we have reached so far, there is a huge gap. And I don't think we can do this only through the educational system, the formal educational system. We have to target a large number of creators. When you talk of rugs, many of them may not have had any formal schooling or education. So they need to be made aware of their rights, and then again they need to be also made aware that more than not, you will not rely so much on copyright or design law as you would rely on a trademark. In the fashion industry, even in the Western world, the copying of one another's designs is rather rampant and will remain so, because that is the culture of that sector. And therefore, they rely largely on trademark rights for protecting their space in the marketplace. That is, it becomes critically important to understand the limitations of not just the legal framework in terms of what a copyright or a design can do, but also the limitations of the judicial framework at the operational level in a country like India. So to succeed in your drug marketing effort or any other product's effort, IP will play a role, but it cannot play an outsized role. There are many other aspects of cost and quality that needs to be managed to create a product of the finest quality. You also need a sizable sum of funds to invest in even finding out who is making copies, and then using all means. Sometimes the means may not pertain to use of IP laws. You may often target such unscrupulous competitors through other laws, because those who counterfeit and pirate or copy are also likely to violate many other laws. They may not be paying many other dues that they should be paying, or doing many other illegal things, and it may be much easier and faster to catch them on one or other fronts than through an action under the IP system. I hope I've given you a sense of the possibilities and the challenges and the solutions possible.
Oh, thank you, sir. Yes, pretty much what's on the ground. The copying is rampant, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, it's the same world over.
Thank you.
I mean, much of learning happens by copying, so imitation is almost essential, but the issue is smart copying. So without violating the IP laws or any other laws.
We have another question from a participant. How feasible it is for small handicrafts organizations to consider IP rights? We work with artisans and with lots of products. Is it worth the time and expense to get into IP, and how simple and expensive it is to get into the whole process?
Well, see, the first thing that any business needs to do is to have a marketing and business plan where you clearly have to distinguish yourself from your competitors. And if you are able to create a niche for yourselves, then to protect that niche, you need a brand, you need a trademark. Now, whether you register an individual mark, So for example, Amul is an individual mark owned by a cooperative, but all members of the cooperative are directly benefiting from that individual mark. But in the handicraft sector, therefore you can use a single trademark collectively owned by a cooperative or an association, or it may be a collective mark similarly registered, which is a simpler option than trying to do a certification mark, because how do you certify quality when it comes to handicraft products? You cannot have specifications of the kind that you have for Darjeeling tea or basmati rice. Handicraft by its very nature would have a very diverse range of products, and oftentimes you may produce only one item and not even a large number of items. And even when you try and make copies of the same, since they are handmade, they may not be identical. But if the handicrafts are collectively marketed, then the collective marketing organization will definitely have a brand and will ensure that, for example, in making such handicraft products, certain precautions have been taken. So no chemicals have been used which are carcinogenic, for example, in painting the handicrafts, or that certain processes were done which are eco-friendly, or that you have not used child labor, for example. So depending on what is your unique selling proposition, you use a brand which can be a simple trademark or a collective mark. You still will have a large number of business secrets, so protecting your secrets in your employment contracts, if you have employees, making them aware that not to share what is central to a particular technique of producing something, not allowing visitors to get into the production areas, that means any unauthorized person should not have access to where such production processes are being done, or that is all part of intellectual property. So trade secret protection and copyright in relation to your any website, any marketing materials that you create, if you hire outsiders in your contracts, you will be dealing with copyright issues, design issues. So there is no escape from understanding what you need to own so that you don't end up with problems later on. I hope you get a sense of what I'm saying.
The next question is from Sayan Tani.
Yeah, hello sir. Actually I have 3 questions, so I'll just put them one by one, but it's all pertaining to rural Indian folk performing artists and handicraft artists, communities rather, who are into practicing traditional either handicraft or folk performing arts.
Right.
So the first question is, let's say for example in certain cases of handicrafts, there are some forms of handicrafts which may be, let's say, applicable in a total region, not any specific village or a specific district or a block, say, region. But having said that, that craft even within the region has distinct styles specific to villages or communities. So would that make them make a case for, let's say, patenting to kind of protect their style, designs and all? That's one.
The patent as a legal IP right pertains to inventions inventions are technical solutions to problems. So I do not see a technical problem here in terms of style. So all such things will be protectable by either design or by copyright. And
copyright. Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, now in the Indian law, design right becomes applicable if more than a certain number of units are produced of handicraft in a day. So if there is an industrial process by which you are making a so-called handicraft product, then you end up using an industrial design, otherwise it is protected only by copyright. In the Western world, even you can have a large number of, even a single item will be produced and can be protected as by design right. In the Indian context, much of it will be protected only if it is truly only handicraft. I mean, even when it's handicraft, you use a certain minimum number of tools. So you could produce a multiple number of copies, and if they exceed 50 in a day, they get into the question of industrial production. So that's an issue of copyright versus design in the Indian context. But more importantly, if each village has its own style, then each village has a right to its own trademark. So the trademark then may use a generic term which every village can use. You can have a collective identity of the entire region, and that collective identity, you can have a smaller identity. That means you use a second trademark pertaining to your village. I hope it's clear.
Yes, sir, I did. And I have a related question in this case. Let's say there is one particular form where the regions are not interested in, sharing the same trademark. But they want the GI protection, that's the premise of my question. So how to deal with their interest, protecting their interest at the same time, because they are not interested in that collective trademark and identity.
Well, I mean, then each village has to have its own identity. If they don't want a collective identity. But what I said initially, not as an answer to your question, but in my general presentation, was the geographical indication route under the geographical indications law is a very, very cumbersome system. So I would recommend using a collective mark or a certification mark as the first step, because collectivizing them even in a village is a task by itself. That means you need a common marketing effort and a common pricing policy. So you cannot have 20 different households each doing its own thing without any coordination and common thinking. If that cannot be done, then you cannot even have a collective mark or a certification mark. But a collective or certification mark is the simpler route, and that requires organizing the people even within a village.
The other question I had is we do it's a traditional music festival for the last couple of years, which is a free festival. It's not like it is a commercial one which has tickets and we sell tickets, nothing like that. All performers, international and national, are traditional artists, traditional folk artists. So they sing necessarily, let's say, songs which have been created, let's say, 200 years ago. So it's not like they own the content. They may own the performing style, but not the content. But here, we are sometimes, asked with the IT societies that we have here, that it's still, because they are performing on stage, there is a certain tax that they need to pay in the interest of the larger artist community. Now, how technically correct or incorrect is it?
Well,
live recording. It's no recording. It's not like the.
Yeah. So if there is, I mean, if it's, one needs to get the full details of what you are saying, but prima facie, I don't think anything would be payable to the Indian Performing Rights Society in your case. But one will have to have the full facts to be able to pronounce on it. I mean, there is a general issue. Yes, if you manage the rights well, the collecting society, then all performers will be benefited. But then they should be able to prove it to you. How will you be benefited by their collecting whatever they collect from you? I mean, if you are able to protect your own interest and you are not using any works, copyright protected works of others, then you have no reason to join any such society.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question is by Pragya.
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Jaya and everybody else. My name is Pragya. I am calling from Tradecraft Exchange, and we work with textile clusters. So my question is related to that sector, and this is in light. We already have several Indian certifications, from the government side, like Handloom Mark, India Handloom Mark, which was launched last year, and others. Additionally, if some of our producers want to have GI marks, like suppose I'm working with Kota Doria cluster, or I'm working with producers of chicken curry, so they can avail the GI mark. But I would like to know, does it really help in the Indian market to increase their market volumes, or is it only pertains to their international trade? Otherwise, a brand I mean handloom brand which was launched last year, that itself covers the factors now, but it does not cover geographical indication, of course. So I'm a little confused with that. If you could just elucidate on, will it be of any helpful to help my producers if I get them handloom mark as well as a GI certification?
Well, it's now, this is entirely dependent on your perception of your customer. Is the customer willing to pay an additional premium for a GI or not? If your branding, from a customer perspective, your product will not fetch you an additional premium, then why do you want to go through the hassle of registering a geographical indication, which is an extremely cumbersome system to create and maintain?
Correct.
I mean, but overall, yeah, I mean, in terms of profitability, there are thousands of other touch points where you can make improvements, which will then improve the financial status of the handicraft makers. So narrowing the, I mean, shortening this value chain so that I mean, when you create value in a value chain, it's not the one who contributes the most who gets the most. It's the one who is able to extract the most from the chain, and often the one who is at the front end of the chain, the retailer, extracts the most profit, because there's someone who's financing the chain may be taking a disproportionate amount of risk, and not the creator. So this is the dichotomy between the creators getting a fair deal versus the risk taker in the value chain who stores the product before it is sold. So if you have a great brand, then you shorten this chain by selling, for example, online directly. So I mean, understand the division of the pie amongst the different people in the value chain, and how to then see whether you can bypass either by joining another chain or getting out of some rungs of the chain, which means, are the intermediaries really adding value in terms of enlarging the market, and therefore even though you have a small profit, but you have a huge base, so overall absolute amount coming to you is large, or you need to find ways to reduce the length of the value chain and get more profit out of a smaller set of products being put on the market. So IP should come as something which is add-on. I mean, the multiplicity of marks will help if there is an audience which values the multiplicity. If there is a customer base that understands that this adds a new dimension that applies.
The next question is from another participant. Who owns the rights in the crafts value chain? Is it the artisan or the designer or the marketer or any other stakeholder? Is there any certified documentation which explains the rights of different stakeholders in the crafts value chain?
See, it depends. If the the creator, in most national legislations, including Indian copyright and design law, the creator owns the right over the copyright or the design concerned, unless the creator is an employee. If the creator is an employee, then the employer owns the rights. So in this whole value chain, we have to be clear who is the creator, and who is the creator an independent entity, a freelancer, or is the creator an employee. If the creator is independent, then he or she owns all IP, unless he or she by contract has agreed to give away those rights to a middleman or to the employer. So you need to look at the documents to know who owns the copyright. If no one has specified anything, then the law says it belongs to the creator.
There is a slight follow-up to this question. So many a times
Yeah.
there's a tussle between the artisan and the designer over the creation. So like you mentioned, sir, we know that the creator finally gets the right, but many a times the artisans claim that this has come from their families, their generations, whereas the designer says that no, I have given an additional design to it, so the right should lie with me. So what is the way out of this kind of a tussle between the artisans and designers?
Well, I think there the question then is not so much of who owns the rights, but how to share the benefits arising out of it. It's similar to the issue arising out of genetic resources and other such things, which means benefit sharing is the issue. So yes, you are using a traditional design, but making changes to it to adapt it to the market for which it is now being made available. So this adaptation is the contribution of the designer. And the original contributor who has maintained that style for generations is saying, I need to share in it. So that becomes a contractual arrangement whereby the two sides agree to share the spoils, as it were, in a particular proportion. And as long as they are happy in that sharing, it's okay. It's a matter of negotiation. But from a copyright or design rights perspective, it's the designer who has added the creative element who will benefit from it, unless the original design itself is protected by copyright. And if you say it's a traditional design 200 years old, then there is no, it's in the public domain. So theoretically anybody can use it.
Thank you, sir, for your response. And this is the last question we have for the day. This is a general question about copyrights and not related to any specific field. We have a lot of copyright infringement in developing countries like India, China, and so many other underdeveloped countries because the cost of products and services is priced at developed economy rates. Why do international businesses expect that people pay such high prices even in developing and underdeveloped economies and also not infringe on copyrights at the same time? Is there a solution to it?
I would say what an international business does, it does often knowingly, which means it is willing to launch a product despite the high piracy rates in those markets. And it tries to optimize its profits. So it has to balance between the cost that it will incur in dealing with infringements versus the overall share of its international profits that it can get from a particular market. So when they insist that a country like India or China or some other developing country improve its enforcement mechanisms, and all it is saying is it is wanting the culture of the country to change, and that change in culture will help only the foreigner. Now, if their prices are high, then copying will take place, and when it comes to certain products which can be copied easily, then it's not just the price, it's the ease of copying which results in more copying. So even if the same products are copied, I mean, let's say if piracy rates for software in countries like China and India at some years ago were up to 90%, they were, let's say, 50, 40, 60% even in the developed world. So over a period of time, that percentages are going down because it is becoming possible for the copyright owners to, through online means, forensically locate who is copying and target those big offenders. Individuals are still not being targeted in general. So bots are able to do a lot of sleuthing for these companies by so-called surfing the web and finding out which are the places where what is happening. I think now it's difficult for me to answer a question as to what should be the business strategy. Differential pricing is a business decision. Parallel importation and grey market goods is a very complex question where arbitrage in pricing across borders results in shipment of products across boundaries, but if the products are purely digital, differential pricing becomes very difficult. So depending on the nature of the product and the business strategy, a company will make its own choice, and there is no way that WIPO or you or anyone else can do anything about it. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mr. Gurikbal. And we have come to the end of this webinar. And we thank all the participants for joining us this evening. Please provide your feedback in the form that will be sent to you shortly after the webinar. This webinar shall also be available as a recording very soon on the Harvard South Asia Institute website. We thank Mr. Gurikbal Singh Jaya for joining us this evening and sharing his valuable insights and expertise from his experience. Thank you, everyone. Good evening and goodbye.
Thank you.